Welcome back to another episode of the Best Book Club, the podcast where I discuss all things literary in the wedgie community with the best minds in the community. The topic for this episode is Lucy and Daniela, one of the most well-known and highly regarded stories, especially by me. He's probably the biggest fan of the story, to be honest. I'm joined by the progenitor of this classic, Hans Gutherson.
Oh, thank you so much. And what a wonderful intro, if you don't mind me saying.
Thank you. I'm really practicing. I'm trying to tighten it up. So I guess to start this out, I'll start it with a summary since I don't think I've ever actually done that. So bare bones in a nutshell, this story is two girls, a bully and a nerd, have a seemingly innocuous encounter that leads to all sorts of bonds being formed, battles being fought, and most importantly, lots of wedgies being given and received. Would you say that accurately summates it?
Oh, yeah, that was beautiful. You need to write summaries for all my stories now. I love that. Yeah, bonds being formed, bullies being fought. I love the
battles, not bullies.
There.
Battles.
Sorry.
Because there are multiple. Yes.
Is better. Yeah, there are bullies who do become formed also. But no, bonds being formed, battles being fought, and lots of wedgies in this very early story by me. Yeah, no, and I'm glad you like it.
Like it? You're selling me way too short there. I'll just get this out of the way right now. This is my all-time favorite story, and it's what I believe is the pinnacle of wedgie stories. So
that's high praise.
And I will sing that praise from now to the end of time. But just getting that out of the way so I don't bog down the rest of the episode with that. Because it will come out in the way I speak about it. So this story was first published. The very first part was put up on Lucky Fetish on January 24th in 2015. Where were you in the beginning of 2015?
Yeah. So this is something I've spoken to you about at length, and some listeners I think will be familiar with some of this story, but that was my first year of university. So think about a younger me starting after some years struggling in high school to become sort of, I guess, popular, so to speak, which I wasn't at first. In the last year of high school, I was in this really good place. People liked me. I was valedictorian of the class, not for grades, because I definitely was not the smartest, but it was a popularity contest, basically, and I ended up winning it, which was pretty wild to think about. So now I'm leaving this place that I felt really good in, and I've never been one that's good for change. So I suddenly have to go to a new school. It's not near me, really. It's sort of downtown in the big city, and I'm from the suburbs. So tons of elements that were changing. I had to start studying journalism professionally in school and things. So a lot of stress and anxiety suddenly bubbling up. This is juxtaposed, of course, next to my budding growth within the community. Before this point, I had been RPing with people. I had contributed to the early community stories and did a little bit of dabbling in writing. So I think I've told this story too, and we'll probably touch on this more, when an opportunity sort of came up on Lucky Fetish forums for what I thought was someone to generate a story for me, and it turned out that wasn't what happened, and I had to sort of write my own story. I saw it as a chance to sort of escape some of the anxiety around growing up, really, and also a chance to sort of stretch my legs. So those two very driving factors ended up motivating me to write the story, and I was very quickly hooked into it. As I like to say, I wrote many parts of the story longhand in the hallways of the university in between classes and such. When I had huge gaps between classes, I would just write down huge swaths of the story, and then I would come home, put my notebook right in front of my laptop, and just start typing out what I had written, making some edits as I went. And that was a good way for me to I think, it put down a lot of feelings, but also just really do long-form writing in a way I hadn't done before, and write this sort of novel. So I think that covers a lot of that.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I didn't know that So this is also just as a disclaimer. This is a re-recording, so I lost the previous episode by accident. But I don't remember if you said that before. But I don't remember you ever saying that you wrote it down while you were like in between classes. That's super interesting to me. Like,
Yeah, I have very fond memories of like, yeah, having long gaps, and I would write it by hand in a notebook that I would have, and I probably still have some of those early notebooks, and just writing out a tons of ideas and thoughts and scenes, full scenes, and then come home and type them out after coming back. So yeah, a way to deal with some of that stress, but also having read so many stories, right? Partly to your question, like, been in the community reading stories from the old Wedgie Girls site, and then Lucky Fish forums, reading everything and commenting inanely on every story I could see and read. This was a point where I was like, let me write. Also, let me write something that I'm going to finish. I knew pretty early on, like, I wanted to do that since I was so tired, even then, of stories that went unfinished because I'd read so many good ones.
Yeah, and that is an unfortunate... I guess not really a consequence, but it's such a common occurrence on Lucky Fetish. It's kind of like where stories go to die in a way.
It's something we see across every board, every place that fetishists have ever found to write on. There's always going to be attempts to write longer form stories, it seems, and more often than not, they end prematurely in that people just don't continue them. And I learned during Lucy and Daniela, and I say this in one of the comments near the end, I came to understand that it is a difficult thing to write so much and to finish a story, whereas before I was just like, why don't they just do it? Finish your story. Why? It's not hard. And I realized, like, yeah, after the 60,000 words that is Lucy and Daniela, basically, it takes a lot of effort. I was driven very much to write that story, and I really enjoyed a lot of it. And I got a ton of feedback and a lot of views on it, which I think really helped. But if you don't get that as a writer, if you're not that lucky, or if the story doesn't drive you, and at the same time, first year university, I wasn't really as busy as a lot of people who maybe try writing are, so I had a chance and opportunity to write it, but it really is a sort of fortunate thing. I could see an alternate universe where it goes unfinished or even unwritten. Imagine the community without that.
Well, that's a perfect segue to talk about the legacy of this story. Just a couple of stats or info points. Number 1, it's the only pinned story on the Lucky Fetish board. Number 2, it has over 301,000 views on that same board, where most get a couple thousand at max. And it's inspired multiple big names to start writing, including Chaos Recon, and other names are escaping me at the moment, but I know there are other ones. Why do you think Lucy and Daniela's had such an impact and legacy in the wedgie community?
Wow, that's a wonderful question, and one I haven't thought too much about, so I like this. Let's see if we can't break that apart.
Yeah.
Exciting. Yeah, I think perhaps we look back at the time it came out, there weren't really long-form stories that went as long as that one did. As you mentioned, January 25th, I posted the first part of that in 2015, and I was posting parts into June of 2015 at least, right?
Yeah, actually,
into the summer of 2015.
2016 was the last post on it by you, I believe.
Yeah, that was not when the story ended. The story ended in 2015. But people were continuing to comment on it into 2016, sort of speaking to the legacy of it, like you said. Yeah. But so I think partly the popularity of it at the time was because I was continuing to post on it, so people would keep coming back. The board was obviously bigger at that time too.
Yeah.
I think what I like to think with Lucy and Daniela is that I took some of the very familiar tropes that have become even more familiar in recent sort of years, the things that we sort of gravitate towards as fetishists, and things that are appealing inherently, the cartooniness of some of what we're into, the whole dynamic of the bully and nerd, which is so classic. And yet I added some twists to it, including deep psychological realism, it feels like, in basically all the characters you get, except for some of the very minor ones, like some of the more cartoony sidekicks, for example, like the twins who always say exactly, and we're very much in that cartoony vein. But with a Lucy, with a Daniela, you get the motivations. They feel like deeper characters. Whereas I hate generalizing, but it might be fair to say some of the other stories on Lucky Fish forums at the time, and even ones today, you see, they don't always strive for that sort of level of psychological realism. There's, of course, many of my favorite stories that inspired this sort of style of writing had done so. Blood Money, for example, which I love, sadistic ones like that. And of course, everything by Auntie Cherry has degrees of that.
Yes.
Luckily and Lucky Sword Winner, of course, to name two. But so I'm coming into that school of it, and I feel like I also really hit on the cartooniness in a way some of those writers maybe didn't. So I'm trying to toe a line here between hyper-realism and psychological realism. What are characters thinking, feeling? And then, like an extreme cartooniness, the very big wedgies, the atomic right off the bat, right, to grab people, and then having to somehow elevate that, which was a struggle for me. I go, how do I top that? My first chapter's atomic. What do I do? So having to put like a flagpole one in the middle, and I guess also subconsciously realizing I need to top that. And so the whole school erupts into giant wedgie war. And you see sort of, and that I think partly inspired by As You Wish, by Jack 538.
Yes.
And the early scene he has there, and then I like to think potentially like people have seen these wars in my story and that, and say, yeah, I want some big wedgie war scenes. So I think that's part of it, sort of carving my own path potentially within writing and forming that niche. And I think also some more easier to pinpoint things, how detailed the wedgies are, I think really appealed to people. But I think also how simple maybe it seems. Like a story has these very clear-cut dynamics, but people end up forming friendships, as you mentioned. And in the end, although there's these different twists almost, that's not the word, but different arcs and changes, you get a very happy ending. And I feel like that's always going to resonate with people too in some ways. So I hope that answers your question. I feel like there's a lot there, but it's really cool to think about that. I never really had, so thanks for bringing it up.
Absolutely. I think something you said is it is definitely a big reason. It's definitely not the entire reason, but I think a big reason why it's had such a lasting impact and legacy is because you don't just write the wedgies and you don't just describe what's going on with the characters. You do both, and you dive into how the wedgies are bonding the characters or tearing them apart, or just you're going through the thought process and swapping back and forth between that and the wedgies, and somehow you were able to write them in an interesting way so that each one felt different, and it wasn't like you were just copy and pasting.
Yeah. I had another thought sort of to that point. It's sort of slipping my mind, unfortunately, but I think it's also that, while I'm balancing all those different things, there's some inherent sort of hotness to the characters, I guess. And I know when I talk, I like to sort of pretend I'm dumber than I am and say, oh, look how hot these characters are. But I mean, with a Daniela, for example, like, she's intentionally this very seductive sexual character who dresses in a very attractive way and things. So like from that, it's easy to sort of gravitate towards some of these characters and find the appeal in them. that I think is pretty lasting. Even though there was no art to this story, unlike like a Between Two Cheeks, who's sort of able to quickly build a brand around it.
Yeah, not
I
at the
I had
time,
never
at
thought
least.
about this before. No, not the time, but
There is now.
yes, now there is art. Finally, when I realized, oh, I could do that. I can
Yeah.
actually make art. Yeah, I feel like maybe something about how visual some of the characters are, how sort of clear it is to picture them in your mind. That maybe helps to cement it for people thinking about it.
Yeah, definitely. It is,
Plus, there's lots of cheerleaders.
yes, there are, and that is also like a super interesting thing that you were able to balance the kind of in a way the different storylines that were happening with the cheerleaders, and then at the same time it's Lucy and Daniela, but they're blending a little bit here and there, but then they're also diverging and they're going in their separate ways. I think you did that like really, really well, like introducing Lucy and Daniela, the characters, and giving us them for a little bit, and then bringing in once we got comfortable and okay, this is the dynamic. These are these characters, and we got an understanding of them. Then you brought in the cheerleaders, and you expanded the story, and the universe to include more as we were getting comfortable. Okay, this is how it is, and so now we can dip our feet a little further.
Yeah, I like that observation, and you're drawing a lot of interesting thoughts from me as we're talking about this because I think of it in a way, and I never thought of this before. I could have named the story like Sam and Amanda, and it could have been their story in some ways. Although, of course, they're not at the forefront of so much of the action. They do get an arc, and you do get their story from early on. The how that ends up for them, and they get their own sort of happy ending as well. And even like a Taylor, who I forget about sometimes, is in the middle of all of this, and also has her own question of who am I going to be, what actions am I going to take.
Right.
And an interesting thing about this story too, to digress slightly, interesting to me is that it's, I guess, the earliest probably example of a theme that I realized after a fair bit of writing pops up again and again in my work, which is that friendships are formed through wedgies, which is a interesting dynamic, perhaps speaks to a sort of hope and need fantasy fulfillment in some ways that we fetishists have naturally. It's like what would be better than wedgies happening and then all of a sudden I have a friend for life because of them. And even Lucy and Daniela experience that. And the story sort of ends on that positive note, like, and wedgies are going to kind of continue to be a thing, and they're going to be friends forever. Very YWNR in a way, too. Teacher wedgie fight. These stories that I had been doing this, and I hadn't realized for a long time, is like, wow, I'm very preoccupied with this idea. So perhaps maybe something like that feeds into it, and for many characters, they get that sort of ending, and they get to form these powerful friendships. So perhaps something in that resonates with readers.
Yeah, and I mean, if you hear any typing in the background, that's just me putting down my thoughts so I don't forget them, because I'm also thinking of things as I go. It all makes sense to me. And maybe it is a bit too big of a question to fully answer at the moment. Maybe we might have to come back to it or answer it at a later time, because it is. I don't know. It definitely. It's like I've said it. It's left a huge impact and legacy. There's a reason it's my favorite story, and not just because the wedgies are so good. The characters feel real, and I think perhaps one of the best things you did in the story is 99% of the characters, besides feeling that they were actually real people, they as every time that I read through I don't feel like one character is there too much or too little, besides one. Almost all of them feel, yeah, this is the perfect amount. Okay, yeah, you came back to them at the right time, so I didn't forget about them, and they were still maybe even like after a little, like right before you brought it back to whoever, like if you were talking about Lucy and Daniela for a little bit, and then right before you would bring it back to the cheerleaders and Taylor and Sam, be like, oh, I wonder what's going on with them, and then you're like, oh yeah, you did it, okay. So the setup for each section and storyline was masterfully done. Chef's kiss.
Thank you.
Okay, so here's another really broad question. How did you come up with the idea for this story?
Yeah, that's a great question. I hope I don't bore you with this story.
You're not going to bore me with anything with this regarding this story. I actually have something with that later on, but any details that I can get on this story, I will devour eagerly.
Wonderful. I love it. It's great. Despite the sort of, if you look at my DA, you see like the large number of watchers I've had to earn over the time. It's still rare for me to get a lot of feedback as it is for the majority of writers in the community, especially those who don't primarily like also produce art and things. So it's always nice to get the love. So thank you, and thank you for doing the podcast too. You do wonderful work.
I do it for myself because I enjoy talking to people about stories. That's why.
That is the best reason to do it, I think. But yes, Lucy and Daniela. So this is a really interesting to me story, one I've shared as many times as I can, because without some of the beginnings of this, I probably wouldn't be talking to you today. You'd be chatting with some other very talented writers. So,
not as talented
what
as
happened after I had been, as I mentioned, RPing on the site and contributing a bit to community stories, where a couple of us writers, including Awesomest Poner, who some of people will be familiar with,
that's
very popular on DeviantArt now.
Really?
And some other smaller named writers who mostly spent time on Lucky Fish forums. After we ran that for a bit, what someone did on Lucky Fish forums back before the board, which in its current state is kind of dead, back when it was kind of popping more, user posted what they sort of described as a story generator, so to speak. And I saw that, and in the post they made, they basically described it saying, put in different info, answer these questions such as, what sort of underwear would a character be wearing? What sort of relationship would these two characters have? And at the end, you'd get a story, was what I thought going into it. And I went, this is great. I don't have to do any real work. I can pick some stuff and it's going to create a story for me. So I go through and I see some fun options. I see Spider-Man underwear and I go, oh, that's cartoony. That's fun. I see Bully Nerd. I go, that's classic. Let me click that one. And I'm going through and I'm picking and I go, this is going to make a really cool story. And then I get to the bottom of this thing and what do I see but a giant open text box. And it said, now write your story. Oh. And I was pissed. I was like, this guy lied to me. I thought I was going to be given a story. You want me to write a story? I want to do that. So I see this giant text box, and I have all these thoughts now in my head because I got to pick these choices. And he's like, he mentioned in the post, and I'll pull up his name in a moment so I can share that detail with you as well. But in the original post he made, he said, any stories that are submitted, I'm going to post them. So at this point, I had never sort of posted my own story there, right? I worked with some people, I'd done RPs, but even that was a very nerve-wracking experience. Whenever I would join the chat rooms on like a Lucky Fish forums, I'd be like, man, I'm interacting with another fetishist. Like, oh, this is crazy. And I'm shivering in my chair as I describe it to sort of explain how I felt, because it was very nerve-wracking for me as someone who's very shy and socially awkward and things. I was like, this is so weird. How's that gonna be like? It was very like mystifying experience. So then to have to post something and put my name on it, for people to judge, and I have a deep fear of rejection that still exists to this day and probably always will, and some imposter syndrome that I don't think I fully realized about till more recently. I was like, I can't do that. I can't send this dude a story. But the idea stuck with me. The Spider-Man underwear, this bully, this nerd, who would bump into each other and they'd give him an atomic wedgie. Like, all these things I had already sort of thought about because I made these choices in this pool generator back at the end of 2014, right before 2015, basically. So one day, I'm sort of coming home, and I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to write something, I'm going to send it to this guy. And I was so nervous about writing up this short story, which is the very first part of Lucy and Daniela, up to and including the Atomic and Daniela getting home, and you realize she has the same underwear that Lucy has, sort of kicking off that there's more to these characters than meets the eye. Daniela being the bully who gives a massive wedgie to Lucy, a very nerdy character in the first chapter, which sets off the friendships forming, as you mentioned. So, as I said, I write this whole thing, I go to submit it, but I'm so nervous, I put by anonymous, so they have no idea who wrote it. And I send it to the dude, and I wait like a day or two, and at the same time as I'm waiting, in the back of my mind I'm thinking, what if someone else claims credit for this story? What if this dude posts it, and someone random goes, oh yeah, I wrote this, I'm anonymous, I wrote it, I'm great, everybody loves me, I'm so popular in the community now, and how could I say then, no, I wrote it, look at me, you guys all love it, you love me actually. So I was freaking out, I was like, what do I do? So I posted it again, I sent it to the guy with my name on it this time. I was like, now he's gonna post it, and he's gonna know it's me, and everybody's gonna love me. But the dude never posted it. So I'm waiting. I'm like, what is going on? He never posted. He hasn't posted to this day if he got any submissions beyond mine. None of them were ever posted. So I couldn't take it anymore. And when I got to get this story out, he might post as anonymous, or he might steal it and say he wrote it. And then he'll be so popular, everyone's going to love him. Is what all these thoughts went, and I still remember it to this day, which is wild. And this was back in 2015. So I ended up posting it on, like you said, January 25th. That first part, just had these ideas from there. I post it, and I hate cliches, but I guess the rest sort of is history. It quickly, I think, took off with some people liking it. And I was sort of hooked on the story myself at that point, having been thinking about it, and a lot of different ideas just sort of coming to me. But that's the very genesis of it, a story I really do enjoy, because without all of those crazy events, it wouldn't exist, I guess.
Yeah. I was going to ask if you have the original, but okay, so that answers that question then. I'm just looking real quick to see who commented on the... Okay, so it wasn't me, unfortunately. I wasn't one of the first people to comment, but that's okay.
His name was Bob Rob, by the way. I found the post to the person who made this.
Okay.
He said, I'll absolutely post the stories I receive for everyone to enjoy. So,
oh, yeah.
December 28, 2014. So only a span of about a month, right? From when he posted that to me posting the first part of Lucy and Daniela.
Okay.
That poll is still accessible to this day, it seems. Let's see. I'm looking at it now. Oh, it might not be. But yeah, that was a fun little blast from the past.
Yeah. So while you were going through the story, what was your writing process for it? And has it changed since you finished Lucy and Daniela? Like, did you have an outline where you were going, or did you write it as you go, that kind of thing?
Yeah. Great question again. Yeah. So even early on, I realized I was developing a process as I was going, especially because in shorter stories, which I had done, including that one I mentioned to you a while back, where someone asked us to, or asked the board, Lucky Fish Forums that is, to write a story based on a picture. And I did a short little one where the character Tracy makes a brief appearance, if I recall correctly. So at that point, I hadn't really been able to develop a process. But then with Lucy and Daniela, I realized as the story kept growing, what really helped me a lot was outlining, but not just outlining, like outlining again and again and again. Like I'd have the same outline, I'd have the same plot points in mind. Uh, Eventually, Daniela would turn good, and Lucy would turn evil, which is spoiler alert. What happens near the end of the story? Points like that. Generally,
Spoiler alert.
Sam
It's
would
Vince.
tell the backstory about Amanda to Erica and things, and different generally points like that, right? Sort of thing. And then I would have that, and pretty frequently I would just rewrite it again, and that helped keep the ideas very fresh in my mind. This is what's gonna happen. That's what's gonna happen. This is what's gonna happen, and that also kept me excited for it. Like I knew very much what was going to happen. Of course, with that method, as I said, just listing out pretty broad story points, big moments that I was thinking of, I quickly realized that a struggle in that method is needing something to fill the gaps in between those moments, right? Which I think is where some writers struggle, from what I've heard, and where I struggled a bit. So I think it helped, like I mentioned, in terms of the actual writing process, to have time in between classes to where I could just sit down and I could write a lot by hand and just put down a lot of those thoughts. And then a lot of times what would fill the gaps would be dialogue potentially, or different moments between characters and things. So that was a big part of the process, both like I call it outlining religiously, just because I was continuously doing it. And to the second part of that question, if it's changed, in a lot of ways it has. I still in some cases will outline a lot, but there's also like a spontaneity, it feels like, more in a lot of work. So for like a Dulling a Knife and Flame Over Darkness, for example, which are a bit different because those ones, Shadow Melder and I, who co-write them, we do a lot of outlining still to this day. A lot of filling in the gaps between points is spontaneity, trying to throw in different lines and connections to things, and subtly hint at things that, and we don't outline a lot of those minutia, but I find that's where a lot of creativity can come in those sort of spontaneous moments between plot points, so to speak, as well.
Definitely.
But it's remained pretty much consistent in some ways, I think, and that's what's helped me be so prolific. In that longer projects, I will have an outline and I'll stick to it, and I'll make sure to sort of keep it very fresh in my mind in one way or another. Plus, listening to music helps as well. For people who don't know, I can't recall what exactly I would have been listening to with Lucy and Daniela. With YW&R, I know that story probably wouldn't have been written without some Shinedown songs that were very great. I could give you guys a listening list at some point too for stories, but that music was a big part of just motivation and blocking out the noise both in my own head and elsewhere. So yeah, that I think gives you a bit of insight into my process, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very interesting. I think our processes are very different in that regard. I can't have any noise around because I usually don't have any noise going on in my head at all. So it becomes distracting, because especially since music is such a big part of my life, it's so important to me. I kind of start focusing on that instead of the writing.
Yeah.
With those notebooks, though, if you still have them, if you were willing to, you could probably sell them or give them away as a contest reward. Like I would be fighting for my life in that contest if that was the reward.
I have tons of notebooks, small ones that I filled with different notes for stories. Both ones like that were finished like that one, and other ones that weren't. Problem is, my handwriting is very messy.
So what?
Which in a way I like, because if like I could write on a bus detailed wedgie stories, and like people looked at it, they'd have no clue what they were looking at. They'd be like, "What is this different language?" So I've always felt comfortable being able to do that, because I'm like, no one could read this. It's so messy. But the problem is, as like a contest reward, people would get it. They'd open it up. They'd be like, "I can't understand a word of this. I need like a Rosetta Stone to make
No
sense of
way.
Hans Gutherson's handwriting." Um, but I like the idea. I'll think about it. Maybe if I see some like nicely written one,
Yeah.
uh, could
Now,
work.
I-
Maybe take some pictures, share them.
I'll buy them off of you. I would love to have those. And it's interesting because I also, when I was younger, I used to have the same thing, like notebooks, and fill them with stories, not wedgie related, but just like write out all these different stories, and then I type them up. But it kind of felt like it was easier to get the story out if I was writing it by hand as opposed to typing. And it felt more genuine in a way. Does that ring true for you at all?
Yeah, I think so. I think it might sound romantic, but yeah, there's something about handwriting them that's special, I think.
Yeah.
I really don't do as much of it nowadays, to your sort of process question, that I did then. Handwriting was a big part of it. Now it's been a lot more on my phone, which is in the past it was very rare.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably an interesting shift to think about, and what that maybe does to the stories and things. But no, yeah, I've always loved, and I've sort of suggested to people, just write things by hand when you can. I think it helps something flow, and it can feel good in a way that maybe like just hitting keys on a phone maybe doesn't with your thumbs.
Yeah.
Being able to see the words come down on the page, and then it also, in another way, is good for editing, because when you're typing out what you've already written, you're able to quickly catch things without
Yes.
having to do like another editing pass. So for me and Lucy and Daniela, I felt like that helped. I was able to quickly look over things and enjoy it for a second time in some ways, but also see it and say, oh, this could be different here and that could be changed, and quickly on the fly adapt lines as I was going, which I think was easier than trying to wrestle all that in my mind the first time typing it out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean it can be. I mean everybody basically carries a phone around in their pocket nowadays, but it's really not hard to just carry around a notebook and a pencil with you wherever you go.
Yeah.
And I think it really kind of speaks to the magic of paper in a way.
Yeah.
Where like, either it's writing ideas or stories down, or poetry or what have you, song lyrics or whatever it is, or reading a book. Like there really is nothing like just the feel of the paper as you turn it and as you put your mind down onto the page. You can't replicate that feeling, especially not with a computer.
Yeah.
So maybe you should. Maybe you could consider something like that. Could also be something you could like commission some art and only put it like print out copies of your major stories like Lucy and Daniela and YWNR and Teacher Wedgie Fight, and then have that art specifically for that as like cover art, or like little artworks above chapters, and never put it on DA or Lucky Fetish and like give those away as rewards or sell them.
That would be cool.
Just an idea.
I've thought about it. Yeah, I've thought about that, because obviously I grew up reading so many books to the point where I think it does something weird to your brain when you read too much. You become sort of impatient with the world and everyone in it, because you see through things. So I've thought about it, obviously, being like, wouldn't it be cool if I like printed and bound like a Lucy and Daniela, like a YWNR and stuff, just so I have like a hard copy of it. And I probably never read it because I don't really read my own stuff, but just to have it and be like, look at that, I did that. That's cool. I like that sort of thing. So I've thought about it. It's the thing with it becomes a question of sort of monetization. Like, would people buy this?
I would,
for multiple reasons, because it exists online already and things. So, but it is a cool question, and something I think it's in my mind. Like, I've always most recently thought it'd be like a cool gift to give like an AP or something to print out like two worlds and bind
Yeah.
that and say, look at this nice gift I got you, something like
Yeah,
that.
or even
Feels
just
like one of the coolest things you could do for somebody.
yeah, or even just like bind together a collection of stories.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you might not even have. You could just go about it like you put a post on DA or Lucky Fetish or whatever, and you say, "Hey, would anybody have any interest in a physical copy of these stories?" Because
Yeah.
like myself, I even though it's already available, that doesn't matter to me. It's like I said, you can't replicate the feeling of of a physical copy of something.
Yeah.
It's just magical.
And on a more comedic note, if that's the word, the thing to think about too is like these stories probably are mostly read for pleasure, right? How easy is it going to be to enjoy the story, to put it, to imply what I'm trying to say, when you have to hold the book open? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Well.
that could be difficult. People will be like, "Well, I don't need to use my hands when I'm reading a story online, right? Or with the phone, it's one-handed. But with a book, that becomes more difficult." So that's just a random thought I had that
Yeah.
might hamper
That's true.
the production of physical books in the community. But I'm all for it. My dream when I was younger was to create like a library of books and include
Yeah.
physical books in them for the community. I mean, so
Oh, that would be
I'm
something.
all for it.
Yeah. Or you could do dulling a knife, or
Yeah.
the name escapes me. Wow, how does that? Flame Over Darkness. You could do those.
Flame Over Darkness.
You
Yeah,
could put
totally.
those because those are
Best
legitimate
sellers.
novels.
Yeah, they are.
Um, okay. Are any of the characters in Lucy and Daniela based in real life?
No, not really. And that's usually how I go. Most characters have a bit of me in them,
Mm.
in things like some of the anxiety and nerdiness of like Lucy, for example, but also just like the sort of self-awareness that some of them have, and then a lot of them are sort of more tropes in some ways that I feel like I go a bit deeper into. Erica being the sort of ditzy dumb girl who's actually like one of the most intuitive and brilliant and things. So
Mhm.
these turns on their heads. Kind of rare for me to include real people in stories, although with some notable exceptions. Like post breakup, Hans Gutherson was very interested in including like a version of himself, a broken-hearted version of himself, and his evil ex in some of his stories. But for the most part, Lucy and Daniela, when I was a very optimistic and happy-go-lucky person, it was a little bit of myself and some of their anxieties. And I think you and I, when we spoke about YW&R, it was much the same, a little bit of me in all of them. But really, mostly just sort of these takes on, in some ways, familiar tropes, if that's feels like a maybe too simplified way of describing them, but I think sums up some of it.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm not necessarily saying like, that you had this cunt of a classmate or something that you just had to put into a story. More so just you had like traits and things like that. I mean, so yeah, so you pull, and I think most people do kind of pull from themselves a good bit. They kind of put themselves in the story. I wouldn't really call it a cliche in a way. I'd say it's more so just a part of the process.
I like that. That's a more optimistic way of putting it.
And maybe some wish fulfillment as well. Like maybe this would happen to us.
Yes. Oh, totally. Yeah. Oh, of course. That is fundamentally so much of the fetish in writing. It's why we do it, both to be remembered and as we live on, but also because like, and so many writers have been open about this. Wedgie Lover 109.
Yes.
Did
Jake and Gwen.
and
is
Gwen,
now doing the other one.
Is a good example. I was Atomic the name will come back to me, but they did the step sibling story with the step brother and the step sister, which was very hot. And they straight up said to me at one point in a post that, yeah, this is very much, I am the step brother in this story, and this hot step sister is like wish fulfillment.
Yes.
This is like a self-insert thing.
Yep.
And yeah, very much with like a Lucy and Daniela. Like, wouldn't it be amazing if we were all in the room seeing this happen and things like that?
If you were Alex and Daniela was your girlfriend, ooh.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because as soon as you say that, I can think of like his opinions on the Flash that he randomly shared when the Flash came out, and that was me. That was literally me. Like at the time, so pissed about that show when it came out.
The grandfather paradox.
Yeah, that was exactly what I thought about the show. I was like, it makes no sense, grandfather paradox. So it's funny. So maybe subconsciously, I was Alex, self-inserted, and I never thought about that till this moment.
Interesting. Okay. Going along with this, quintessential question: favorite and least favorite characters.
Wow, Tracy always has a special place in my heart.
Mm-hmm.
Since I name that story, YWNR and Teacher Wedgie Fight, I named them, the three of them, the Tracy trilogy.
Yeah.
Named after her, so that's part of that. Even though she's such a minor part of that story, this sort of fun wedgie fetishist who flies under the radar, I think, is interesting. I'm probably going to say, actually, although I like Tracy, and when I think I mentioned to you, I had ideas for an interactive story that would take place during the giant war in Lucy and Daniela, and you'd play a character who's trying to survive and not get wedgied, basically, during this war. You would meet Tracy in, like, a closet and have, like, a little exchange with her and things. So she clearly, like, means a lot to me, obviously. YWNR, very much her story. But I'd probably, favorite character, I'd probably say Sam, actually.
Okay.
I like her arc. I like that we do get some of her backstory. And while she is a hot fetishist that is obviously appealing, she also has these struggles and is dealing with things, and in a subtle way, maybe all the heartbreak she felt is sort of externalized in the way she treats the cheerleaders and her hopes for the future and things. Maybe she's trying to impress Amanda with all these actions and things. But I don't go too explicit with it, which I think was to the benefit. Least favorite, I'd probably say it's a tie between the two twins, who not even twins, I think, but who say exactly like,
Christine and
I
Brittany.
think they're funny and they're fun, but also I feel like I could have done a lot more with them. Like, they come off as this sort of as these very cartoony characters, whereas some of the others, as you noted, don't. Which I think is to the benefit of the story. But if I were to like rewrite the story, for example, I'd probably want to give them more. Maybe one of them is more into all the wedgie action, and there's some fallout between them or something, and dive more into their relationship in general, because they really are these sort of like, I don't know, almost emotion. That's not the word.
Vapid.
Character development less characters, so to speak.
They're vapid.
Yeah, that's a good word. Both, but not just personality-wise, but from a story development and arc-wise, they're very flat, I suppose.
Yeah.
Is the word.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. I think they do serve the purpose they're there for. I mean, you were the one who wrote it, so you have way more of a knowledge of it in your head. But I don't really necessarily see that they could do much else beyond what they did.
Yeah, I mean, we can always speculate. Like, perhaps they could have been, I don't know, they could have switched sides at the end or something, and they could have. It probably would have felt too crowded of a story, just thinking if I had tried to give them more space, but maybe not. Maybe there was more I could have done, so they didn't feel vapid, as we said.
I don't know.
It's a good thing to think about.
I think, like I said before, I think it was just enough space. It was done basically perfectly in my mind. There's enough time spent on every character except one, And I think you just handled it masterfully. If I was going to answer the question, I would say with the cop out answer, I guess, is Danielle is my favorite character.
Yeah.
I think.
What a hottie.
That's not why though. It's because of the character arc that she goes through.
Mm-hmm.
That's why.
Her big character arc.
Yes, I think she has the biggest of all the characters.
Yeah, she does. Yeah, it's true. You're not wrong. I say it jokingly, and again, this is me trying to pretend I'm dumber because it's easier. But yeah, she really does. It's so much like Lucy. We see sort of turn evil, as I mentioned.
Yeah,
sort
of tries to
up
adopt
with the
a new
bullying she
personality.
endures. Yeah, and Daniela is. It feels like in some ways a more gradual shift towards being a better person, and
it feels
even
more
characters.
earned.
Yeah, I like that because he like the teacher character who has to sort of encourage her and tells her own story of being a bully and things like that. There's these sort of subtle reasons she realizes what she does is wrong, and it starts right at the beginning with that first wedgie when she realizes like I am not exactly who I pretend to be.
Well, even
And we
before
sort of
that,
realize as
like
readers.
even before the wedgie ends, when she sees the underwear that Lucy's wearing, she's like, "Oh shit, this person's not too different from me. What am I? Who am I? What am I doing?"
Well said. Well said. Yeah, you summed it up. Definitely. Yeah, so then seeing her grow and obviously the self-sacrificial act that she sort of does in the end, which I know you're a fan of, I think it was very powerful and for that because it feels earned, I think, to that point. So, yeah, and while Lucy has a sort of similar arc, it's good to see people turn to the good side of the wedgie force, so to speak.
Yes. And I get for my least favorite, I have to go with Alex, purely because he didn't. I think that was the one character who didn't get enough time.
Yeah.
It sort of felt like he was there just to pair someone up with Daniela.
Sure.
That's probably the only criticism that I can give about the story as a whole, at all.
Yeah.
Because he comes up a couple times, but it didn't. It felt like it sort of came out of nowhere that Daniela actually had a crush on Alex, and then it didn't really go anywhere. So maybe that was a little bit of space that you could use to flesh out Christina and Brittany.
True, yeah. Yeah, maybe someone tries to seduce Alex and he's like, no, Daniela's hotter. Something like that. Yeah, no, that's a super fair point, and I think it's partly, I think partly because Lucky Fish Forums is so against the presence of guys in general, that probably subconsciously influenced how little he's in it. And then from like a creative, my own personal standpoint, even like a YWNR, it's very light on guys. I think during the sleepover, they mention a crush that they have on somebody, and that I don't think that's ever explored at all. Like we don't. I think I could be.
But in that story, it doesn't need to be because that's just girls talking in a sleepover.
Yeah, but here, you're right. Here with like an Alex character who does pop up, it does. You're right. I totally understand the idea that he feels a little. It feels like there could be more of them. I think that's definitely a fair critique. So something I feel like I've sort of gotten better at is just the handling of men and stories in general. And so it's probably a cop out to blame it on Lucky Fish Forums and their sort of opinions on guys, which in 2015 was very like don't have any in the stories. But still, I managed to do it in there, and he's in it a bit. He also, of course, is like the binary opposite to Lucy's crush, which is a super hot but vapid dude who's a jock alpha bro sort of type.
Chad.
So it's obvious. It's like this very comedic, cartoony thing, which is like this nerd's into the super hot jock and the super hot cheerleader is into the nerdy guy. So in that way, they're symbols, and I think that's one way to look at the story, very symbolically, which is a weird way to talk about wedgie fetish stories. But I think we as fetishists understand objects better than maybe most people because we are attracted to them in a way others aren't. But thinking symbolically, right? It's this theme of relationships being formed through through wedgies, but it's also like, what do these cartoon characters represent within the community, the wish fulfillment aspect that we mentioned, and just how these cartoony aspects can be played on in some ways, which maybe speaks again to what we started on with its resonance within the community.
Yeah, I'm just typing out something real quick, just a thought. Because I do have something I want to hit on before I hit this point. Sure, that's the word. I wouldn't necessarily call the crushes that Lucy and Daniela have as cartoony. I would say it's more accurate to real life. Because when you look at people's interests and you talk to them and you find out what they're interested in, perhaps the best way to describe it is the grass is always greener on the other side. People are always looking at, people are, maybe when they settle down they realize this isn't actually what I really want, but when they're thinking of, when they're just thinking about it, this would be good, like when they have crushes and that kind of thing, they kind of become attracted to the opposite of them.
Yeah, I like it. The wedgies are always hotter on the other side. That's what the cliche should be.
No. How about this? The wedgies are always hotter in the other cheeks.
Yeah, that's it. You got it. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I want to see in the next Fortunate Events show. That's what I want to see. I love that. Yeah. Oh. No, I'm sure you're right. And like I said, if we think about them as sort of symbols, it's like it is this opposites attract thing. It is, again, people breaking from lanes, I guess, to put it in basic terms. You have Lucy not going with the nerd, Daniela not going with the hot jock. And it's, again, choosing different things from what you are at a certain point.
Subverting expectations.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. And perhaps that was something I was trying to wrestle with myself, sort of heading into university and things, trying to deal with who am I, really, which is a core question in the story. And perhaps, again, is why it has a legacy, if it does, which is difficult to say until you see an influence there. So who am I? And I feel like that's something I was trying to answer. Can friendships be formed through wedgies, as I keep asking, and a question I'm preoccupied with, because what would be better than that? But also, like, can I make the right decisions, and is the choices I'm going to make me into a good person, for example, right? And when the voices in your head tell you to do something bad, can you come back from that? Like a Daniela, was it too late for her to change? Like a Lucy, when she becomes evil, is it too late for her to become good again?
So I'll ask that question after I do this point, because I think this is really I think you're gonna love this question, and I think it's gonna really hit on the legacy question as well.
Ooh.
So Alex, I think, not being in the story as much as he should be, I think that is more so. I think it's more a matter of it's because it's not that he could have been used more, but like you said earlier, I think he was born. I think he was put in the story. He was born of your frustration, and you had to get it out. And Lucy and Daniela was the most readily available format that you could put it into, if that makes sense.
What frustration are you talking about?
Well, you said you had frustrations and anxiety and that kind of thing.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I thought you meant like with Lucky Fish forums that
No,
they
no,
didn't
no,
have
no,
guys.
just
I was
in
like
general.
sticking it to them, which
Yes.
is I thought about.
No, so I'm wondering if like
Yeah,
he became the epitome of that, and like that was the way you could vent those feelings.
I think it isn't Alex. I think it's Lucy and I think it's Daniela who
Okay.
epitomize that. These characters who write are at a changing point in their lives. Keep in mind they're both graduating from high school, right? Which is what I would just done. And they're
Mm-hmm.
moving on to somewhere new. So they have different people telling them different things about who they want to be, who they can be, and reflecting on who they are. So, unlike an Alex, who is just sort of there as a love interest, and he breaks the Bechtel test in my story. If I had made them all women, that might have been good and hotter. But like Lucy and Daniela, there's always this constant struggle to figure out who you are, and as they form a friendship, these two unlikely sort of companions, and as they share their interests, they're constantly challenged, right? Amanda,
Yeah.
like no sooner do they sort of meet up for the first time to have a friendly conversation that someone is spying in the bushes to catch their secrets and then blackmail them in
Yeah.
like a ridiculous fashion, right? And then every opportunity they have to sort of get closer, the cheerleaders bust in and Lucy's hoisted up the
Yep.
flagpole and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like, yeah, they really are. The story itself, very much, as I said, was a way for me to deal with these anxieties, these sort of feelings I had, these questions that only now, talking to you about it and reflecting on it years back, I'm able to sort of fully understand the reasons behind some of this, and especially the more I write, the more I'm learning this about myself. And it's wild to think how long it takes, sort of 7 years, so to speak, of writing a lot of different stories, short and long.
Yeah.
Some of them being flops, and some of them getting some views and people liking them.
And some of them being
I think.
smash hits, like dulling a knife.
Thank you. Yeah, Sharon and I had a lot of fun with that. But you do sort of a part of this that isn't talked about a lot. It feels like to me, or maybe I'm just not hearing it. Is that you do really learn a lot about yourself through the writing, and it really can
Yes.
be satisfying
Yes.
in a way. So
And
it definitely
cathartic.
did help me. Yeah, it is definitely. It helped me deal with a lot of those anxieties and frustrations and get through that first year of university and even
Mm-hmm.
beyond. I was able to carry the success of that story with me and also feel like I could continually write, and I think I'm still carrying the legacy, if you want to say anything about Lucy and Daniela, is that I'm still writing to this day, and I'm writing
Yeah.
stories. I probably wouldn't without that story. So I never thought about it like that, but that's maybe the legacy that means the most to me.
Yeah. So here's the question that will possibly tackle why there's such a big legacy and impact on the community. Is Lucy and Daniela a coming of age story?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, 100%. Many of my stories are, I realize, talking to you about them. And they're often sort of couched in maybe adventure of some sort,
Mm-hmm.
or some bigger quest like the many memories of Wedgies, which if I ever continue, I feel like will be like a magnum opus, and I've talked to you about that one a bit. Or City of Wedgies, which is a post-apocalyptic sci-fi thing. Like these
Mm-hmm.
are all coming of age stories, and I feel like
Yeah.
so much of what I do is from like a YW and R, which is very clearly coming of age, but even like a teacher wedgie fight where they sort of come to terms with their fetish, which is one of the biggest struggles we face, and I think
Yeah.
part and parcel of a wedgie fetish is coming of age story,
Mm-hmm.
in many ways. So Lucy and Daniela, very much so. They do answer the question of who am I at the end by choosing to be better, to become friends, to embrace the sort of friendship that they have, and sort of um, buck the consequences and screw everyone who isn't with them. And in the end, basically everyone is with them, and they all have their own happy endings because Sam and Amanda sort of come of age and mature and say like we're gonna give our relationship another chance and things like that as well. So yeah, I think very much a coming of age story.
Yeah, I mean, there's some of the most popular and well-regarded movies and books. I'm trying to think, like, what's Stand By Me.
Yep. Stephen King, my
Yeah,
man.
coming of age is such a relatable story, especially for the age group that this fetish tends to cater to and comprise of. Um, that's kind of the age that people are at, and they're trying to figure out who they
Yeah,
are and what they want to do, who they want to be. And
I
so
love that.
I wonder if
Yeah,
I think it really just comes down to that, is like people can identify with these characters because they're
I
also
love that.
going through those same struggles, just in a
Yeah,
fetishist's mindset.
totally. Yeah, I like to think I've been able to in that story, but not really that story. Although with Sam, you get a bit of it. Is tackle what it's like to be a fetishist
Yeah.
more than anything else, and the mindset of that and the struggles that come with it, and make a genre of sorts and analyzing that in psychologically real detail. But yeah, when you to contextualize some of your comments in the survey I did in 2017, the demographic survey, the results found that the vast majority of wedgie fetishists are white males between 16 to
Yep.
20 years old. So think about that period
Yep.
and the vast amount of changes you're going through as you
Mm-hmm.
grow from this teen to into an adult, and all the struggles that come with it. So when we talk about coming of age, figuring out who you are, answering that eternal question, yeah, a story like Lucy and Daniela, I can
Mm-hmm.
totally see
Yeah.
resonating with them. And as you pointed out, it's inspired some people to write, to probably answer that question themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And also just because they realized, hey, I have things I want to say as well, and that
Yeah.
helps. I think it. There's so many different facets to that question. What is the legacy of this story? But
Hmm.
I think that's also a major part of it. Is it just, yes, it's about wedgies, but it's primarily about these characters, and it's one of the
Yeah.
first stories to do that. And I think
Yeah.
I think that is probably the biggest reason why, because these characters feel real, and so people can identify with them.
Yeah. And I could put together a reading list of the stories that inspired me. Many of them that had done what I was trying to do with this story, which was there's wedgies, but there's also everything else. And I feel like I put it more poetically and succinctly in the past, but that's basically what I've always been interested in. I didn't just want those stories that you and I read on like Experience Project, or that we still
Mm-hmm.
read to this day
Jesus
on
Christ, yeah.
DA. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly right. Yeah, it brings back memories.
Yeah, not good ones.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And even the ones on Lucky Fish Forum, some of those short, sort of rushed stories in some ways that
Yeah.
very quickly jump in the wedgies, and I'm reading them
Hmm.
and I'm thinking, yeah, but what are they really feeling?
Yeah.
That's what's going to excite me, both
Hmm.
as a reader, but also like sexually, which the stories in a way should do. I think that's part of the genre,
Yeah.
which makes it difficult to talk about them, and I think why podcasts doing so are kind of rare. But um, yeah, it was always about trying to strike that balance. And I know in Lucy and Daniela writing such a longer story, I was very often struggling with that question of is do I have too much blah blah blah, so to speak, an
Hmm.
expression I like to use when I talk about stories, because I often do. And you see nowadays I have so much, right? I have so many digressions, but I try to even now balance that against the wedgie being very detailed, very long. You get basically every sense that a fetishist has: touch,
Yeah.
taste, feel, smell. Trying to include that in the sensation so you can picture it as vividly as you can.
Hmm.
So I was trying to do that in Lucy and Daniela, and wondering, like, is this enough wedgie? I have all this talking. I have Sam telling the story about a person she was into,
Yep.
but where's the wedgie, right? Like, I need to balance that, or people aren't going to read it, was what I thought. So that was tricky for sure. But yeah, I like to think that I hit a pretty decent balance in that, and that's probably helped it along through the years.
I was just thunderstruck with a fantastic idea that would really take a lot to pull off, but it's nothing to do with this story, so I will write that down and come back to it later. But I think right now is a good place to take a break.